Thank you. Yeah, I remember when we first invested in Unchained, we got started in early 2020. And it was right when COVID started. And I first did a phone call with Parker and Joe from my childhood bedroom in Kentucky with lots of kids' trophies in the background because we had all migrated back down. I was living in New York, and we moved down to live with my parents for 3 months. And that was the very first deal that we cut, was backing Unchained, so very excited about doing that. We are on the agenda today as a venture platform, but we generally don't like to consider ourselves a VC fund or venture platform, in part because of the negative stereotypes that come with that label. I don't know if you guys know, but around Bitcoin parts, people don't really like VCs. But also we think the role that we have to play in the ecosystem can be much more broad than just traditional venture. So from the very outset of forming Ten31, we always referred to ourselves as an investment platform. And we even went as far to say that we were going to be an anti-VC and that we would be doing things differently than a traditional VC in a lot of different ways. So what is wrong with traditional venture capital? This is a Venn diagram I put together, which is a combination of the money printer, or infinite liquidity, with a growth at all cost mindset and burning cash, and mix that all together, and you've got fiat VC. And the perception, of course, is that this is very easy and it's relatively low risk. Of course, we know in hindsight, especially over the last couple of years, that's not true, both with blowups we've seen in the crypto space broadly, but also in just broader venture capital. We're seeing that the old way of building businesses, growing businesses, and investing in businesses perhaps is not going to work going forward. So what do I think investing looks like under a Bitcoin standard? Rather than infinite money, it's scarce money in Bitcoin. Rather than a growth at all cost mindset, it is producing value and minimizing cost. And then rather than burning cash, it's generating what I like to call sats flows. So what is 1031's approach? Parker alluded to it. The overarching point is just alignment with Bitcoin. And what do I mean by that? There's 4 parts I want to touch on, but it really comes down to every little decision we made when we were forming 1031. How do we align what we were doing with the ethos of Bitcoin, with the mission of Bitcoin? And it even comes down to our name. Now, our name, I think, might be confusing to a lot of real estate people, but 1031 is the date of the white paper. Maybe some of you weren't aware that that was our name, but we didn't name ourselves Andreessen Horowitz or Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts, or Gilliam, Kirkwood, Odell, Ben Arnold, which would have been a terrible name. Every little decision like this was based on how can we think differently from traditional VC and build an investment platform that was aligned with Bitcoin. So the 4 components I want to talk about briefly is just, first, the mission. We are in this for more than just making money. We think there's a tremendous opportunity to make money, and I'll get into that. But to us, this is about the mission of Bitcoin and helping bring Bitcoin to the world. Everyone on our team, we have a relatively lean team. There's 5 of us. We are all Bitcoiners. We were Bitcoiners before we formed 1031, and we are just as much Bitcoiners as the founders and the companies we're backing, and that's an important part of our approach, and the founders and teams that we back know that. Next, in terms of approach, Bitcoin is an open network, and we try to take some inspiration from Bitcoin and create our own open network, which we call the 1031 Tribe, it's a community. It is our investors, it's the founders and teams that we're backing, and really anyone in our broader network that wants to participate, wants to be involved, wants to support us, wants to support the ecosystem. We throw events, both in person and virtual, on a regular basis throughout the year. And this has proven to be pretty powerful. There's lots of participation among our investors, lots of excitement for supporting the space. Next, in terms of approach, Bitcoin is interoperable. Now, this is a very underappreciated aspect of Bitcoin. And I'll tell you right now that even me saying that this is an incredibly underappreciated page, most people still will not appreciate it. But the fact that Bitcoin is open and interoperable, and a company building in the space can not only create value for itself, but also add value to the rest of the network, implies that if you have a portfolio of companies in the ecosystem, one of your companies can positively impact the investment prospects of another company in your portfolio. And this type of symbiosis and network effect is going to prove to be very powerful, I think. We already have, just on the right page is more just, right side of the page is more just a visual depiction of many of the companies that are collaborating in really interesting and powerful ways. And this is something that I think is very underappreciated, but will become more obvious over time to people in the space. And then the final piece in terms of our approach is just proof of work. Even our logo, by the way, which I designed, it may be kind of basic and terrible, but it comes from the white paper, the diagram that talked about proof of work. And we try to live and breathe proof of work in everything that we do. And that's not just investment capital. That means producing content. That means education. Matt and Marty do a ton of that, as you all know. It means being active in the community. We're very active here in Austin, as well as Bitcoin Park. And I mean, you can pretty much find us at any meetup or BitDevs around the US and even globally. And then finally, it also means grants. And hearing Steve, it's pretty powerful what they've been able to do. But we're pretty proud. For the last 5 years, we've been using a portion of our management fees to make no strings attached grants to contributors in the open source ecosystem. It's a relatively unique model among any fund, but we're very proud to do it. So a snapshot of Ten31 today. As I said, we're now in our 5th year. We've raised and deployed 2 funds so far. We're raising our 3rd as we speak. We've invested $125 million of equity across the ecosystem, backing 36 companies, and very excited about the track record that we're building. Here's a snapshot of our portfolio. A lot of logos on this page, may be tough to see depending on where you're sitting, but I'm sure there's some logos that would be familiar to many people here, likely many that are not. There's a large handful of them that are speaking today. So I won't go into any individual detail, but the 2 main points I would make are we invest across the ecosystem. We've constructed a relatively balanced portfolio across all the major themes, and then we're backing the best teams and founders in the world and very excited about what they're doing. The Ten31 thesis is simple: Bitcoin is eating the world. It's a catchy phrase. It's a reference to Mark Andreessen's "Software is eating the world" comment from long ago. It's also a shout out to an essay that John Arnold on our team wrote, so that's why I put the big blue hyperlink here. If you haven't read it, you should. If you haven't met John, he's in the audience right there. You should talk to him. He's the engine behind a lot of what we do. But in short, we just believe that Bitcoin is superior digital money. And as its adoption continues globally, there'll be more infrastructure built around it, more companies building products and services to support a growing user base. And those are exactly the type of companies that we're investing in. From an investment standpoint, I alluded to this earlier, but we think there's tremendous upside in what we're doing to actually make money. I hope everyone or most in this room would recognize on the left side, Bitcoin is by far and away the leader in the broader crypto landscape. But what is really interesting is on the right side of the page, the vast majority of capital, to the tune of 100 to 1, has been raised and deployed elsewhere, broader crypto ecosystem, DeFi, et cetera, which we think creates tremendous asymmetric upside for what we're doing. And so what I like to say here, just the middle quote, is in a money printer world, there literally is infinite liquidity, but there still remains a scarcity of capital aligned with the Bitcoin companies. So areas of interest, I did say we invest across the ecosystem, so we generally find interesting opportunities everywhere. But to call out a few here, the first one, global fiat off-ramps, which that's sort of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying the global Bitcoin on-ramps, but Bitcoin adoption is a theme we expect to persist for quite a while. So companies that are helping onboard new users to Bitcoin, we're very excited about. We're the lead investors in Strike and the largest investors in Strike, and they've been rolling out globally in a much more significant way. Institutional interest is clearly picking up. So companies that are catering to that type of client we think will be compelling. Think custody models, insurance, et cetera. That's an area that we're watching pretty closely. On the more technical side, Xiaomi and eCash I think is incredibly exciting. We gave a grant using a portion of our management fees, as I was explaining earlier, to the Fediment open source project even before Fedi existed as a company. Both Fedi and Mutiny in our portfolio are doing really interesting things in this area. You'll hear from both of them later. We more recently gave a grant to the developer Kali for his work in this space. I think this is a really fascinating area to watch. Adjacent freedom tech could be other areas, looking at Parker here, like Nostr, which are complementary to Bitcoin. And then new tech entrants, what I mean by that is companies that are coming from outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem, traditional tech companies that are looking to incorporate Bitcoin into their business in some way. We think that'll be a growing theme over the coming years. Finally here, this is my last slide, but in terms of long-term vision, as I said, we consider ourselves more to be an investment platform for supporting the ecosystem in lots of different ways. We actually have done quite a wide variety of investing that doesn't necessarily fit your traditional venture capital profile. We've helped incubate companies, we've led later stage growth and pre-IPO equity fundraisings. We have a really comprehensive mining portfolio, and we've also even dabbled in some credit-oriented investing. And I think at some point, each of these you could justify being their own standalone businesses underneath 1031 as we grow. And then finally, as we think about some of the storied investment franchises of the last several decades, like a Sequoia, they made their name early on by supporting a wave of technology adoption and backing many of the companies which became the technology leaders of today. We think there's a similar opportunity for 1031 to back and support this new wave of Bitcoin adoption and back many of the Bitcoin companies that become the technology leaders of tomorrow. And so we're excited to go on that mission and help bring Bitcoin to the world. That's it.
All right, thanks, Grant. Questions? Here we go, Sean.
Hey, Grant. Couple questions. One, what are the top things you guys look for in pre-seed companies that are very early, and then also long-term? Are you guys hoping for your companies to have like a public IPO, or just to maintain equity, or a mix of both?
Yeah, good questions. You're sort of asking investment judgment, really. Like we invest across, it's a pretty wide variety of investing. We'll do early pre-seed investing, and then we've even led Series B, so it's pretty wide. But how do we pick and choose opportunities? I mean, it's a mix of team, idea, opportunity that you're going after. I mean, I highly suggest to come back to the piece I referenced from John Arnold. I mean, he talks about how we think about the opportunity in front of us. But by and large, at the early stage, pre-seed, it is very much about team and like the founders that we're backing. Trying to have judgment on individuals and teams is tough, but that's a core part of what we try to do. The second part of the question, what do we think about in terms of exits? I mean, it's funny, we have this Bitcoin-oriented investment platform and funds around it, but we still operate in the fiat world. So we do have US dollar-based fund structures, which means that they are not infinite life. They have fixed duration life. Over the time period of our funds, which are typically 10 years, we do expect a whole variety of potential exits. It could be IPOs, it could be strategic acquisitions. We think even some of them could decide they want to remain independent and gravitate more towards profitable, sustainable business model that generates SATS flows. And we would be excited to see more companies pursue that path. And how do you monetize investments that are doing that? Well, ideally, those companies are paying Bitcoin-denominated dividends, and we have one or two of those in the portfolio that are on that model, but it's still rare. But long-winded way of saying, variety of exits. We're not going to push one way or another. Every situation is different.
All right, Lynn.
Hi, Grant. Thanks for the presentation and more importantly for the work that you're doing. My question relates to your slide about the mismatch of capital available and Bitcoin innovation. It's two parts. Who are your ideal investors or LPs? Are you finding more individuals? Do you have an institutional interest? And then what would be a follow-up is, I'm sure in your discussions, they must be aligned with Bitcoin, and how do you get over the hurdle of why not just invest in Bitcoin and why support Bitcoin innovation?
Yeah, I was expecting that second question at some point today. That's the most common question we get is like, why should we invest in you guys versus just buy Bitcoin? There's probably a 30-minute answer we could go into on that, but I'll keep it very brief. But the first question, originally the investors that we've had, generally we found them and they were already interested in Bitcoin. We did our prior fundraisings between 2020 through 2022, and there were a lot of groups that are pretty diverse that were already interested in the space, and we didn't have to convince them about why Bitcoin only and why Bitcoin only infrastructure. And it ranges from your Bitcoin OG that was mining in 2010 or 2011 to your just high net worth individuals to family offices, a very common one because they tend to be a little bit more nimble, a little bit more forward thinking, and just move quicker than some of the institutions. But even some of the institutions, there are university endowments that already hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Some of them hold other crypto assets on their balance sheet too, unfortunately. But some of them hold it directly. They mine Bitcoin. So we have a couple investors like that. But for the most part, historically, we were very unsuccessful in convincing people who were not already interested in Bitcoin about why go with us versus just broader crypto. Because one of the most common answers was, I kind of see some signal that's happening in broader crypto landscape, but I don't want to pick a winner. I want to be agnostic. And that sort of rules us out because they would prefer to invest in a crypto fund. Now, the last couple of years, most of those investors have gotten completely blown out, which is a validation of our strategy, but also a lot of them have touched the crypto stove and they don't even want to come back in right now. So our ideal investors right now, it's pretty broad. It's people who are interested in Bitcoin, who see the signal that the last couple years have proven. But then also we're trying to tap into a broader funnel of investors who might not have actually dabbled in the space yet. The second fun question of basically, can we outperform Bitcoin is the question. Like, why would we give you money versus just buy Bitcoin directly? We always say you should own Bitcoin directly. We do have some investors who still haven't bought Bitcoin, and there's like a couple different profiles. One guy said, I just don't trust myself to hold Bitcoin. I think I'll sell it right when it dumps, so I'd rather just give it to you guys. But then there's others who are more comfortable just investing in a traditional legacy financial product and still sort of unfamiliar with buying Bitcoin directly. But those are some exceptions. We do say you should just buy Bitcoin for sure. You should have that exposure. But how could you believe that perhaps this makes financial sense? Well, we like to say that Bitcoin going up to 100,000, a million, pick your price target, it's not going to happen just exogenously without the infrastructure around it. It won't go up to those prices and not benefit all the companies that are building in the space. In fact, it probably won't go up to those prices unless the companies themselves help enable more people to come into the space. So if John likes to say, like, if Bitcoin is this rocket ship, like the Bitcoin companies are fully strapped on the rocket ship. And because these are effectively levered plays on Bitcoin, we think there's a real chance to outperform Bitcoin.
All right, we're gonna do one more question for Grant. Okay.
So you kind of alluded to the traditional like Sandhill Road firms getting burned by FTX and those sort of things. In the wake of that, let's assume they learned their lesson there. If they decided to pivot to Bitcoin, do you think they're just going to be turned off by like, oh, there's no pre-mines or things like that? Or do you see anybody sort of learning to take the longer view on that from the traditional, not necessarily Bitcoin-focused VC firms?
I think that eventually, when they start to see it, I think it'll become pretty clear that the Bitcoin companies who are operating ethically with the mission and vision of Bitcoin in mind, they will not be interested in any type of tokens or anything like that. And I just think that will be pretty easy for some of these big Silicon Valley firms to eventually understand. The problem is they already have sort of tainted their reputation. That's part of the sweet spot that we have, is that we are Bitcoiners. It's kind of like proof of work. It's very easy to verify that someone is a Bitcoiner, and it's very hard to fake. Like you can't fake proof of work. Eventually they'll come in. I'm not really seeing it in a significant way yet, but more capital coming into the space will always be a good thing anyway.
All right, let's give a hand to Grant.